every name lies a secret buried in blood. From inbred kings to cursed families, we follow the veins that built empires, because some bloodlines weren't meant to survive, yet they did. If you found your way here, you already know the truth.
They told us we were free, that our leaders were chosen by the people, guided by merit, by principle, by chance. But freedom, as it turns out, is a story we have been told, a comforting illusion. Because in the shadows of history, behind the pomp and ceremony, there is a single thread, a quiet, unbroken bloodline stretching back nearly 1,000 years. Every U.S. president, tied together by the same hidden ancestry, the same silent inheritance. If you found your way here, you already know. The truth lives in the shadows. Welcome to Underbelly Bloodline, where history bleeds and the past never stays buried. Subscribe if you dare, and step deeper into the dark. It begins with a name, almost forgotten by time, King John of England, tyrant, misunderstood, condemned. Yet in his veins flowed the beginnings of an empire of influence that would, centuries later, reach the shores of a new world. From Washington to Biden, from Jefferson to Lincoln, the blood of kings whispered through genealogical records, pulses beneath the fabric of American democracy. Look closely at the portraits hanging in halls of power. Notice the familiar lines of the face, the same crooked smile, the same hollow eyes. You are not looking at mere coincidences, nor at history's randomness. You are staring at inheritance, at the quiet echo of one man's lineage reshaping a nation over and over, in ways no law, no vote, no constitution could disrupt. And yet, no one speaks of it. The textbooks remain silent. Historians avert their gaze. The people are told they choose freely, while the chains of ancestry twist invisibly through every election, every decision, every oath of office. Who truly rules this country? The answer is older than the Declaration, older than the Constitution itself. It is written not in ink, but in blood. Tonight we pull back the curtain. We follow the thread, from the stone halls of medieval England to the marble chambers of Washington, D.C. We will see power not as it appears, but as it was inherited, the secret patterns that democracy never reveals. And by the end of this chapter, you will ask yourself a question that cannot be ignored. Have we ever really chosen our leaders? Or have we simply watched the same bloodline pass through history, generation after generation? But that is only the beginning. Somewhere, in the genealogical shadows, the first cracks are waiting to appear. In the early days of the American colonies, the land seemed untouched, a canvas of promise stretching from the misty mountains to the restless sea. Children ran through fields, their laughter carried on the wind, unaware of the chains that would one day bind them, not to kings, but to their heirs. Freedom smelled of pine and salt, and the light of morning promised new beginnings. Yet, even then, shadows lingered at the edges of the forest, whispers of old worlds carried across the ocean. The first presidents of this fledgling nation did not emerge from common soil alone. Their roots were entwined with European crowns, tangled with noble bloodlines who had long held sway over kingdoms, wars, and the whims of fate. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. Names that evoke liberty and vision, but beneath the surface lies a quieter truth. The same veins that coursed through medieval kings flowed into theirs. It was subtle, invisible, yet inexorable, a whisper of royalty in a republic that claimed to be born of the people. Walk through an old colonial town, past weathered clapboard houses and cobblestone streets. Notice the portraits hanging in dimly lit rooms, the old family crests etched into mantelpieces, the faded letters penned in careful cursive. A simple symbol, a lion, a crown, a winding vine, carries a secret echo of inheritance. Small details, almost imperceptible, yet they ripple forward, reaching centuries later into the Oval Offices of a nation that believes itself free. The townsfolk went about their daily lives, unaware that history had already written them into a larger story. A story not of revolution or equality, but of lineage, of blood carefully tracked, recorded, and preserved. Every oath sworn to the Constitution was an echo of ancient obligations. Every vote cast a note in a symphony composed long before the colonies existed. And still, the world outside remained serene. The birds called in the morning, the church bells tolled on Sundays, and the wind stirred the pages of letters no one dared to read aloud. All seemed ordinary, innocent, unremarkable. But beneath that calm, the first threads of the rot had begun to twist, winding quietly through the generations. Soon, the myth of freedom would meet the reality of inheritance. The calm before the storm would fade, and the shadows of ancestry, those subtle, unbreakable ties, would begin to reveal themselves in ways no citizen could have imagined. It began with a simple homework assignment. A 12-year-old girl, seated at a worn wooden desk in a quiet corner of her family's home, opened a history book and began tracing names, dates, and connections. She was not searching for secrets, nor plotting to uncover dynasties. She was simply curious, a child's curiosity untouched by politics or ambition. And yet, in the careful crossing of lines and the meticulous drawing of circles, she stumbled upon a fracture in the story of America itself. Each president she examined led back to another, and another, and another. Their ancestry, she realized with wide-eyed fascination, traced not to revolutionary ideals, but to a man long dead, King John of England, the tyrant whose name carried whispers of misrule and betrayal. Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, even the leaders of today, each linked in a chain that spanned continents and centuries. The realization was dizzying. America's greatest leaders, celebrated for independence and vision, were bound by a quiet inheritance of blood, their destinies seeded long before the first colonists ever set foot on this land. She looked closer, pencil trembling in her hand. The web was intricate. Marriages between noble lines, cousins separated by oceans but reunited in the name of power, and the deliberate preservation of a bloodline now embedded deep within the fabric of the Republic. Every oath sworn in the halls of Congress, every inaugural address delivered with solemn pride, echoed a lineage older than the Constitution, older than the dream of democracy itself. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying the sound of a world oblivious to the revelation in a small bedroom. A single candle flickered, casting moving shadows across the girl's face, illuminating the awe, the confusion, and the subtle fear that comes when the truth pierces innocence. For in that web of ancestry, there was more than history. There was inheritance, obligation, and control. She closed her notebook slowly, the lines on the page now pulsing with unspoken questions. Who had allowed this blood to flow, unbroken, unseen, into the highest office of the land? How had the Republic, built on freedom and choice, been shaped by inheritance instead of ideals? The first crack had appeared, subtle, almost invisible, but it would grow, widening into a revelation that would challenge everything the world thought it knew about leadership, democracy, and the very nature of power. And in the silence of that room, one truth began to whisper. History had been lying all along. The descent began not with fanfare, but with paper. Yellowed documents, fragile as dust, bound in leather and tucked away in forgotten archives, whispered truths historians long refused to acknowledge. Lineage charts, meticulously penned centuries ago, revealed a web of connections so vast it stretched from the stone halls of medieval England to the marbled chambers of Washington, D.C. Every arrow, every branch, every repeated surname told a story not of revolution or independence, but of inheritance, of obligation, of blood preserved above all else. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, names etched into the nation's conscience, celebrated for vision, for liberty, for courage. And yet, under the scrutiny of ancestry, they became more than leaders. They became vessels, conduits of a bloodline that had survived centuries of war, plague, and upheaval, quietly consolidating power in ways no election, no vote, no constitution could disrupt. Historians had dismissed the connections as coincidence. They called it overreach, speculative genealogy, or fanciful imagination. But the evidence could not be ignored. Letters written in flowing script, marriage contracts between cousins, wills detailing inheritance not just of land, but of influence, each document a faint heartbeat of a lineage older than the nation itself. And as the records multiplied, a pattern emerged, a deliberate preservation of power. Cousins married, alliances forged, families intertwined. No historian wanted to admit it, for it contradicted the founding myth that America had been built purely on choice, merit, and principle. Yet the document spoke with relentless clarity. History had fractured, The ideals of democracy were now entangled with the veins of kings. The moral decay of this revelation was subtle at first, like a stain spreading through parchment. The promise of liberty was overshadowed by inheritance, the dream of equality supplanted by bloodlines. Figures who once seemed heroic now flickered in candlelight as flawed, human, yet complicit in a secret system older than the nation itself. Every oath of office, every vote cast, was part of a quiet echo of medieval obligation. Outside, a storm rattled the windows, and in the flickering shadows of the archive room, one could almost hear the sigh of centuries, the weight of history bending under its own secret. The descent was complete, innocence shattered, myth undone, and the first real understanding of power's persistence settled like a cold stone in the chest. The question that now burned brighter than any candle's flame: if blood governs silently across centuries, who truly decides the fate of a nation? And yet, the answer remained just out of reach. Power, it turns out, is rarely accidental. It is inherited, curated, and preserved, like a precious gem locked away in the vaults of history. And in the case of America, the preservation was deliberate. The first major crack in the myth of democracy arrives not in speeches or legislation, but in the quiet, calculated unions of blood. Secret intermarriages among political dynasties, connections hidden from textbooks, whispered only in the margins of old letters, suddenly reframed everything we thought we knew about leadership. The Kennedys, the Roosevelts, the Bushes, even families whose names are celebrated as paragons of liberty were bound together, generation after generation, by marriage, by arrangement, by the invisible hand of inheritance. Cousins marrying cousins, distant relatives reunited across oceans, alliances forged in private chambers long before voters ever stepped into a booth. Each union was a stitch in a tapestry of influence, subtle enough to evade notice, yet potent enough to shape the nation's course. Look closer at the portraits that line the halls of power. The familiar faces, the confident gaze, the poised hand, the deliberate smile, suddenly carry new meaning. They are not merely leaders, they are heirs, carriers of a lineage older than the Republic, a bloodline that has quietly dictated the rise and fall of dynasties from London to Philadelphia. And in every handshake, every marriage certificate, every whispered promise across family tables, the chain of control tightened further. Historians shrugged, journalists overlooked, the public never suspected. And yet, the proof lay dormant, waiting to be uncovered. Genealogical charts linking presidents to one another, family trees circling back to English royalty, documents that revealed how influence was inherited as surely as property. It was a system invisible to most, yet absolute in its consequences. And here, at the breaking point, the illusion of choice shatters. Democracy, we are forced to ask, was never as free as it seemed. Power did not arise from merit alone. It was bred into the veins of those who would wield it, a hidden inheritance that eclipsed ideology. The revelation cuts like a knife. The Republic of the People may have been a stage, but the players were cast long before the curtain ever rose. And as the audience sits in the flickering shadows of this truth, one question remains, gnawing at the edges of consciousness. If blood decides the leaders, what room is left for freedom? And in that silence, the cracks widen, and the story plunges deeper into darkness. The spiral begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. One marriage leads to another. One family alliance blossoms into a network. And before the world notices, the invisible threads of inheritance have woven themselves into the very foundation of a nation. Politics, once portrayed as the battleground of ideas, is revealed as a chessboard for the descendants of a single, unbroken bloodline. Every move calculated, every pawn placed with precision, every crown's echo reaching across oceans and centuries, banks, corporations, media empires. The reach of these families extends far beyond the halls of Congress or the steps of the White House. They shape economies, decide which voices rise and which vanish, and influence elections in ways no citizen can perceive. The power is subtle, silent, yet devastatingly absolute. The spiral tightens, and the illusion of choice falls away, leaving only the faint outline of control beneath the veil of democracy. Listen closely. In the quiet, you can hear the rhythm of history repeating itself. The ticking of clocks in abandoned halls, the rustle of old papers documenting alliances, the whispered promises made over centuries. Then, chaos intrudes, scandals erupt, markets tremble, wars ignite. But even in the turbulence, the pattern remains. Every crisis, every upheaval, every seeming coincidence leads back to the same line of inheritance. The chaos is the mirror, the calm, the mask. Look again at the leaders of today, their pedigrees, their alliances, their inherited influence. It is no longer just ancestry. It is power codified. And yet, the public continues to believe in meritocracy, in fairness, in choice. They cheer for candidates, vote in elections, imagine that their voices matter, and all the while, the spiral turns. The same hands guide the nation, unseen, unchallenged, and unbroken. The spiral is dizzying, disorienting. As the camera pans across genealogical charts, faded letters, and portraits of presidents long gone, the viewer begins to feel it. The vertigo of realizing that power is not earned, but inherited. That the dreams of democracy have been quietly siphoned into a current of blood and legacy that flows through every law, every policy, every decision. And as the spiral tightens further, one haunting truth emerges. Freedom is only as real as the chains we refuse to see. And the deeper we descend, the closer we come to the revelation that will change everything. The question now whispers in the mind: if this spiral governs all, who, if anyone, truly holds the reins of America? The revelation comes like a slow, suffocating dawn. For centuries, it has been whispered in corridors of power, buried in dusty archives, glimpsed only by those who dared to follow the trail. King John of England, a figure dismissed as a tyrant of medieval legend, did not vanish with his crown. His blood, carefully preserved through marriages, alliances, and heirs, courses still beneath the foundation of the United States. Every law signed, every policy enforced, every leader inaugurated carries a trace of that inheritance, a silent signature written in veins instead of ink. Eyewitnesses recounted in fragments, historians, genealogists, and private researchers who stumbled upon letters too damning to ignore. "It's all there," one archivist whispers, turning fragile parchment that links presidents across centuries. Every branch, every union, it's deliberate. You can see the pattern. You can feel it. And in that pattern lies the quiet horror. Democracy, revered as the great experiment of freedom, is intertwined with a single line of dominion, unseen but unbroken. Documents confirm it. Marriage contracts between cousins, wills that dictate influence, and genealogical charts meticulously detailing the intersections of power reveal a reality that challenges everything we've been told. Thomas Jefferson's ancestry, Theodore Roosevelt's connections, the Bushes, the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, they are not random occupants of office. They are heirs, executors of a bloodline older than the Republic itself. The crown that John lost on English soil has found its way across the ocean, hidden beneath the stars and stripes, in the faces of those we celebrate as leaders. The moral weight of this revelation is nearly unbearable. The nation's laws, its freedoms, its ideals, each one carries the invisible fingerprint of ancestry. The air grows heavy with the realization that choice has always been, in some sense, an illusion. That the Republic, so admired, so envied, has long been a stage for a dynasty that moves silently behind the scenes. And yet, even as this truth settles, a deeper question emerges, one that chills more than any historical fact. If King John's blood still guides the hand that signs the laws, then who truly governs this country? The revelation is complete, but understanding it fully, the horror, the inevitability, the moral decay, is only beginning. The shadows of inheritance stretch farther than we ever imagined, and they are not yet finished with the living. The collapse does not announce itself with thunder. It seeps quietly, like water through cracks in ancient stone, eroding faith, hope, and the illusions we cling to. Democracy, the shining ideal, the birthright of a nation, begins to unravel, thread by invisible thread, until all that remains is the raw skeleton of truth. Choice was never ours. Power was never dispersed. It was inherited, preserved, and carried silently through centuries of blood and obligation. The weight of history presses down like a leaden sky. Portraits of celebrated leaders, faces that once inspired pride, now stare back with hollow inevitability. They are not heroes of principle, but vessels of a lineage older than the nation itself. Each election, each law, each protest feels insignificant against the relentless pull of inheritance. The Republic trembles not from external threat, but from the knowledge that its very foundation has always been preordained. It is a moral collapse as much as a historical one. We are left to reckon with the dissonance between ideal and reality, between the promise of freedom and the chains of bloodline control. The stories of liberty, revolution, and choice echo hollowly, like distant church bells tolling in an empty village. Every oath taken by a president, every debate held, every hand raised in promise of change, now seems overshadowed by a hidden inevitability. And yet, the dread is almost beautiful in its inevitability. There is a pattern, a rhythm, a dark poetry to the way power has been preserved, nurtured, and passed down. The curse of inheritance is no longer an abstract concept. It is tangible, breathing through history, present in every decision, every dynasty, every whisper of influence that shapes a nation, still convinced it is free. Outside, the wind howls through abandoned streets. Shadows stretch long across empty chambers. Silence falls between the echo of past footsteps and the creak of doors unopened for centuries. In that silence, one feels the oppressive truth. The illusion of democracy has ended. All that remains is the inheritance of kings, quietly, inexorably, guiding the fate of millions. And in that suffocating stillness, one question lingers, unrelenting. If history has always been cursed and power always inherited, what hope remains for the living? The collapse is complete, the illusion shattered, and yet the story is not finished. The aftermath is quiet, almost unbearably so. The storm has passed, but its echoes linger in the hollow halls of history. Democracy lies in ruins, not destroyed by war nor by rebellion, but by the slow, relentless current of inheritance. Freedom, once thought to be a birthright, now feels like a memory fading at the edges, fragile as smoke curling from a dying candle. What survives is lineage. The bloodline persists, unbroken, threading through the centuries like an invisible river beneath the land. Portraits still hang on walls. Names are still spoken in reverent tones. History still records victories and defeats. But beneath it all runs the same pulse, the same inheritance. Kings dead for centuries still guide the hands that sign laws, still whisper through the corridors of power, still shape destinies far beyond their own graves. Yet, in the ruins, there is something else, a quiet resistance, the human impulse to question, to seek, to remember. Scholars comb through dusty archives. Curious minds trace genealogies. Children sketch family trees in the margins of notebooks, unaware that they are chasing shadows centuries old. And in that pursuit, a fragile hope persists, that the truth, once glimpsed, can illuminate, can awaken, can warn. There is reflection, too. Reflection upon what has been lost, what was never fully ours, and what may still be salvaged. Liberty, it seems, is not a gift, but a negotiation with history. Every law enacted, every election held, every protest staged is now seen in the dim light of ancestry and inheritance. We are heirs to more than property or title. We inherit patterns, obligations, echoes of power that move silently, shaping a world that pretends it is free. And yet, the mystery remains. Some questions will never be answered. Who truly governs? How deep does the bloodline reach? Which decisions were made freely, and which were guided by forces unseen? The shadows of the past stretch long, entwining themselves around the present, leaving the living to navigate a maze whose walls were built centuries ago. As the candle flickers and the wind whispers through empty streets, one truth becomes undeniable. The Republic endures, but only as a stage for a story older than itself. The actors change, the scripts shift, but the lineage persists, haunting every corner of power. And in that haunting, one final thought echoes. Even in the ruins, the bloodline remembers. The echo begins where the story first stirred, a question whispered in the shadows, a thought that has haunted every revelation since the very beginning. Who truly rules? Across centuries, across oceans, across wars and revolutions, the answer has been both everywhere and nowhere. It lingers like a faint wind through an empty hall, brushing the portraits of presidents long gone, tugging at the edges of history, whispering a truth too unsettling to fully acknowledge. We thought we were free. We believed in choice, in merit, in the sacred pulse of democracy. But choice, it seems, has always been framed by inheritance, merit guided by lineage, democracy shadowed by dynasty. The hands that built the nation were not as impartial as we were told. They were guided quietly, persistently, by a bloodline stretching back to a king who never set foot in this land. King John's legacy flows like a river beneath every capital, every court, every chamber of power. Look at the faces of those who govern today. Their smiles, their poise, their confidence. They are shaped by centuries of expectation, of obligation, of inheritance. The echoes of kingship ripple in the quiet folds of history, unseen but undeniable. Policies, elections, revolutions, all appear spontaneous, but each is a note in a symphony orchestrated long before the first colonists ever arrived. And yet, even in this revelation, there is a strange beauty. The tapestry of lineage, the persistence of blood, the unbroken chain of influence. There is artistry in it, even if it is terrifying. We are witnesses to a force that transcends ideology, party, and era. We are spectators to a story in which the nation itself is both stage and actor, every detail preordained, every performance rehearsed in secret. The echo lingers, refusing to fade. Perhaps it is in the silent inheritance of power that we find the truest reflection of history. Not the heroes, not the revolutions, but the quiet, unyielding persistence of blood. It asks us to reconsider everything we have believed, our freedom, our leaders, our very idea of choice. And, as the last candle flickers and the shadows stretch long across empty chambers, the question returns one final time, heavier than ever. Was it ever a democracy or a dynasty? The echo fades, but the thought does not. It will follow, whispering, haunting, and insisting that we listen to the shadows we have so long ignored.